What's good everybody, this is CP and welcome back to another fantasy basketball video. Today I'll take a look at a list of underrated players that could be huge difference makers for your fantasy teams in the last few months of the 2019-2020 NBA season. In my opinion, some of these players are worth trading for or holding on to for the right price, as their fantasy stock has a chance to bounce back in the second half of the season. With that said, let's not waste any more time and 走起吧. Mike Conley of the Utah Jazz has been one of the biggest fantasy disappointments so far this season. He averaged around 13 points with horrible shooting percentages and under 1 steal per game for the first half of the season. Add injuries to that and Conley's overall production has been trash, especially if you drafted him somewhere in the top 45 to 60 range in October. In some leagues, I could see managers not wanting to deal with his BS any longer, making him a good buy low candidate for the second half of the season. We can't forget that once he returns from injury, Conley should still be the Utah Jazz starting point guard, and as long as he gets playing time, there's still a chance for him to bounce back and have a better second half. At 32 years old, Conley might be on the decline, and we may never see the Memphis Mike Conley ever again. But if Conley is able to be 75% of his former self, he could still be a serviceable top 80 to top 100 player in most standard leagues, giving you around 16 and 6 a night along with 1 steal and 2 triples a game. Trading for him might be a worthwhile gamble since we might have seen the worst of him this year. So if you can get him for 50 cents on the dollar, it might be time to do so now. Despite a very slow start to the NBA season, the Jonte Murray of the San Antonio Spurs has picked things up in the last little while. In the past month, Murray has quietly become a top 100 player, averaging around 12 points, 5.5 rebounds, 4 assists, and a very impressive 2.2 steals per game. It also looks like the Spurs are gradually increasing his playing time as the season goes on. Murray averaged the season-high 26 minutes last month, and we might see him push closer to 30 minutes in the next little while. Going forward, Murray's fantasy production should continue to improve, as it doesn't seem like he is on a minute restriction anymore. Obviously, the scoring could be better, and he is pretty much a punt guy in triples. But his biggest fantasy asset is his ability to steal the ball. He is currently a top 10 fantasy player in steals, and having him on your team makes you much more competitive in that category. At the same time, Murray is an elite rebounder for his position and can grab you around 6 to 7 boards on a good night. Overall, Murray has looked impressive since working his way back into the Spurs starting lineup. But even when he is coming off the bench, he could still be an effective stat sheet stuffer on a per minute basis, giving him a chance to remain a top 80 player the rest of the way. Moving on, De'Aaron Fox of the Sacramento Kings is another name who hasn't lived up to his pre-draft rankings. This makes him a potential bounce-back candidate to target in the second half. Fox battled with injuries early on and hasn't really improved much from his sophomore year, averaging around 17 points and 6 assists per game. But last month we saw his shooting percentages increase to around 51%. At the same time, his defensive stats saw an uptick, as he averaged around 1.6 steals per game. As of now, Fox's trade value isn't high, as he is ranked outside the top 100 in standard 9 category leagues. Therefore, he could potentially be had for cheap, especially if you buy from GMs who don't want to hold on to him any longer. Like Conley, I think we might have seen the lowest point of Fox fantasy numbers this season. But if he can stay healthy and build from last month, he could eventually work his way back into the top 100 the next little while and be a huge difference maker for your fantasy teams during the playoffs. Before I move on to the next player, I just want to quickly say that it would mean a lot to me if you subscribe right now, and I'll love you forever. I promise. Anyways, let's move on to the next player. Heading into this season, I expected Kevin Huerter to have a huge breakout year, but obviously that hasn't happened yet. But from what we have seen lately, I think Huerter could be a name that can surprise some people in the coming months. Despite his early injuries, it seems like Huerter has started to pick things up recently. Last month, he averaged around 10 points, 2 triples, and close to 4 assists and over 1 steal per game. and was a top 150 fantasy player. He also played around 28 minutes a game, so it's fair to say that Atlanta is giving him opportunities to eat. Huerter's role as the Hawks starting shooting guard should be safe the rest of the way. He is also the Hawks' third best scoring option, only behind Trae Young and John Collins. So if either of those names gets hurt or load managed, Huerter should be the biggest benefactor of usage and minutes. In some leagues, Huerter might still be available on the waiver wire. If not, you might be able to get him for cheap on a low-end deal before his stock rises in the coming months. Down the stretch, I can see Huerter be someone who can get you above average numbers in steals, assists, threes, and points for a shooting guard. Marvin Begley is another interesting name who could be a huge difference maker for teams down the stretch. It has been a disappointing season for Begley owners so far. He was injured after his first game and missed 2 solid months of basketball. Begley recently came back for a short stint and got injured again. At this point, some managers might be done with him and may be willing to let him go for cheap. So overall, Begley might be a pretty good buy low option before he comes back from injury. From the 6-game stretch he played, he averaged around 13.3 points, 7 rebounds, 1 block in around 24 minutes of play. So there is some value there. He was only in the starting lineup for 2 of those games, so I think there is still some untapped potential for him this season. Assuming Begley returns in full health, he still has the skill set and potential to finish the season as a top 90 to top 100 fantasy player. If he makes modest improvements from last year, he could still be a 16-8 guy with a good field goal percentage for you later in the season. And if you don't mind waiting on Begley for a little longer, he could be a good buy low option to trade for before he heats up in the last few months of the season. Norman Powell could be another sneaky pickup for your teams down the stretch. Before going down with an injury, he was putting up career numbers, averaging around 14.5 points, 4 rebounds, 2 triples, and over 1 steal per game. But after getting hurt, I'm kind of surprised to see him available on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues. So if you have an IR spot open, it might be worthwhile to pick him up and stash for a while. Toronto is dealing with a lot of injuries this season, and Powell could return before Pascal Siakam and Marc Gasol. And once Powell returns, he should have an important role in the Raptors' rotation once again. His usage could see a nice uptick before Siakam comes back. Or on nights when the Raptors decides to give Spicy P some rest, Powell's playing time should see a nice bump. Down the stretch, I could also see Powell continue to eat into OG Anunoby's minutes and have a big impact for fantasy owners looking for a shooting guard / small forward who can give you above average stats in 4 categories. In the end, it depends on the makeup of your team and what stats you are chasing. But if you have an open spot and is looking for someone with Powell's skill set, it could pay big dividends for you during the fantasy playoffs. If you enjoy watching my fantasy basketball videos, make sure you click the link right here to watch more. So let's not waste any more time and 走起吧。